Elizabeth Stuart, also known as Elizabeth of Scotland, Electress Consort Palatine, Queen Consort of Bohemia, and the Winter Queen. She was born on the 19th of August 1596 at Dunfermline Palace in Fife, Scotland. She died on the 13th of February 1662, aged 65, at Leicester House in London, England. Her husband was Frederick V, Elector Palatine. Their children were Henry Frederick, hereditary Prince of the Palatine, 1614 to 1629, Charles Louis, Elector Palatine, 1617 to 1680, Elizabeth of the Palatinate, 1618 to 1680, Rupert, Count Palatine of the Rhine, 1619 to 1682, Maurice of the Palatinate, 1620 to 1652, Hollandine of the Palatinate, 1622 to 1709, Louis, 21st of August 1624 to the 24th of December 1624, Edward, Count Palatine of Simern, 1625 to 1663, Henrietta Marie of the Palatinate, 1626 to 1651, John Philip Frederick of the Palatinate, Frederick, 1627 to 1650, Charlotte of the Palatinate, 1628 to 1631, Sophia, Electress of Hanover, 1630 to 1714. Their last and 13th child was Gustavus Adolphus of the Palatinate, 1632 to 1641. She was of the House of Stuart. Her father was James VI, King of Scots and the First of England. Her mother, Anne of Denmark. Elizabeth was born at Dunfermline Palace in Fife on the 19th of August 1596. At 2 o'clock in the morning, King James rode to the bedside from Callander, where he was attending the wedding of the Earl of Orkney. At the time of her birth, her father was King of Scots only. She was named in honour of Elizabeth I of England, her godmother. She was christened on the 28th of November 1596. During her early life in Scotland, Elizabeth was brought up at Linlithgow Palace. When Queen Elizabeth I of England died in 1603, Elizabeth Stuart's father, James, succeeded her as King of England and Ireland. The Countess of Kildare was appointed the Princess's governess. Along with her elder brother Henry, Elizabeth made the journey south towards England with her mother in a triumphal progress of entertainments. Elizabeth remained at court for a few weeks, but there is no evidence that she was present at her parents' coronation on the 25th of July 1603. There was plague in London, and Prince Henry and Princess Elizabeth were moved to Winchester. Anne of Denmark produced a masque to welcome them there. On the 19th of October 1603, an order was issued under the Privy Seal announcing that the king had thought fit to commit the keeping and education of the Lady Elizabeth to Lord Harrington and his wife at Combe Abbey. Part of the intent of the Gunpowder Plot of 1605 was to assassinate Elizabeth's father and the Protestant aristocracy, kidnap the 9-year-old Elizabeth from Combe Abbey and place her on the throne of England and presumably the thrones of Ireland and Scotland as a Catholic monarch. The conspirators chose Elizabeth after considering the other available options. The conspirators aimed to cause an uprising in the Midlands to coincide with the explosion in London and at this point secure Elizabeth's accession as a puppet queen. She would then be brought up Catholic and later married to a Catholic bridegroom. But the plot failed when the conspirators were betrayed and Guy Fawkes was caught by the king's soldiers before he was able to ignite the powder. Elizabeth was given a comprehensive education for a princess of that time. This education included instruction in natural history, geography, theology, languages, writing, history, music, and dancing. She was denied instruction in the classics, as her father believed that Latin had the unfortunate effect of making women cunning. By the age of 12, Elizabeth was fluent in several languages, including French, which she was said to speak with ease and grace. She was also an excellent rider, had a thorough understanding of the Protestant religion, and had an aptitude for writing letters that sounded sincere and never stilted. She also was extremely literary. As the daughter of a reigning monarch, the hand of the young Elizabeth was seen as a very desirable prize. Suitors came from across the continent and were many and varied. They included Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, later the King of Sweden; Frederick Ulrich, Duke of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel; Prince Maurice of Nassau; Theophilus Howard, Lord Howard of Walden, later 2nd Earl of Suffolk; Otto, hereditary Prince of Hesse, son of Maurice Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel; Victor Amadeus, Prince of Piedmont, the King of Spain's nephew and heir to the Duke of Savoy. Marriage would cost Elizabeth her father and her father's kingdom. Unlike the childless Elizabeth I, James, by simply having children, could play an important role in dynastic politics. The selection of Elizabeth's spouse, therefore, had little to do with personal affection and a great deal to do with benefits that the match could bring. The man chosen was Frederick V, Count Palatine of the Rhine. He was of undeniably high lineage. His ancestors included the kings of Aragon and Sicily, the Landgraves of Hesse, the Dukes of Saxony, and the Counts of Nassau. Frederick arrived in England on the 16th of October 1612, and the match seemed to please both of them from the beginning. Their contemporaries noted how Frederick seemed to delight in nothing but the company and conversation of his new bride-to-be. King James did not take into consideration the couple's happiness, but saw the match as one step in a larger process of achieving domestic and European Concord. Elizabeth's mother, Anne of Denmark, was not keen on the marriage, but after meeting him, she said she was much pleased by the man. On the 6th of November 1612, Henry, Prince of Wales, died. His death took an emotional toll on Elizabeth, and her new position as second in line to the throne made her an even more desirable match. Elizabeth stood by Frederick, whom her brother had approved, and whom she found to have the sentiments of a fine gentleman. Above all, he was regarded as the future head of the Protestant interest in Germany. The marriage contract was finalised, and in a ceremony at Whitehall on St. John's Day, the 27th of December, Frederick took Elizabeth's hand in her bedchamber and led her to the king in the banqueting hall, where they kneeled on a Turkish carpet and received his blessing and the blessing of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The contracts were read out loud by Thomas Lake, but the poor quality of the translation made the guests laugh out loud. Frederick was in purple velvet trimmed with gold. Elizabeth wore mourning black satin with silver lace, and a cloak of black velvet sprinkled with silver flowers, trimmed with gold lace, and a plume of white feathers in her hair. Her mother Anne of Denmark was absent, suffering from painful gout. After the ceremony, Frederick and Prince Charles went back to wearing mourning clothing. The marriage took place on the 14th of February in the chapel of Whitehall Palace. A processional route was established around the palace so that the wedding party could be seen by more people. For the benefit of spectators around the palace and in adjacent buildings, a scaffold walkway was raised, crossing an open courtyard. Elizabeth was nervous during this ceremony and could not help laughing. Afterwards, the guests drank spiced honey wine and dinner was served. After almost 2 months' stay in London for continuous celebrations, the couple began their journey to join the court in Heidelberg. The journey was filled with meeting people, sampling food and wines, and being entertained by a wide variety of performers and companies. Although Elizabeth and Frederick were considered to be genuinely in love and remained a romantic couple throughout the course of their marriage, problems had already begun to arise. Before the couple had left England, King James had made Frederick promise that Elizabeth would take precedence over his mother and always be treated as if she were a queen. This at times made life uncomfortable for Elizabeth, as Frederick's mother, Louisa Juliana, had not expected to be demoted in favour of a young daughter-in-law. As such, their relationship was never more than cordial. Elizabeth gave birth to 3 children in Heidelberg. Frederick Henry, sometimes called Henry Frederick, was born in 1614, Charles in 1617, and Elizabeth in 1619. In 1619, Elizabeth's husband was one of those offered the throne of Bohemia. Frederick, although doubtful, was persuaded to accept. Elizabeth appealed to his honour as a prince and a cavalier, and to his humanity as a Christian, aligning herself with him completely. The family moved to Prague, where the new king was received with genuine joy. Frederick was crowned officially at the Prague castle on the 4th of November 1619. The coronation of Elizabeth as Queen of Bohemia followed 3 days later. The royal couple's third son, Prince Rupert, was born in Prague 1 month after the coronation, there was great popular rejoicing. Thus, Frederick's reign in Bohemia had begun well, but only lasted 1 year. The Bohemian crown had always been a cornerstone of Habsburg policy, and the heir Ferdinand, now Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II, would not yield. Frederick's reign ended with the defeat of the Bohemian Protestant armies at the Battle of White Mountain, which ended the first phase of the 30 Years' War on the 8th of November 1620. Elizabeth is remembered as the Winter Queen and Frederick as the Winter King in reference to the brevity of their reign and the season of the battle, fearing the worst by the time of the defeat. At the Battle of White Mountain, Elizabeth already had left Prague and was awaiting the birth of her 5th child at Castle Kustrin, about 50 miles from Berlin. It was there on the 6th of January 1621 that she, in an easy labour lasting little more than an hour, was delivered of a healthy son, Maurice. The military defeat, however, meant that there was no longer a prospect of returning to Prague, and the entire family was forced to flee. They could no longer return to the Palatinate, as it was now occupied by the Catholic League and the Spanish contingent. So, after an invitation from the Prince of Orange, they made their way toward The Hague. Elizabeth arrived in The Hague in the spring of 1621 with only a small court. Elizabeth's sense of duty to assist her husband out of the political mess in which they had found themselves meant that she became much more an equal, if not the stronger, partner in the marriage. Her lady-in-waiting, Amelia von Salms, soon became romantically involved with Frederick Henry, Prince of Orange, and married him in 1625. The two women became rivals at the court of The Hague. While in exile, Elizabeth produced 8 more children, 4 boys and 4 girls. Louisa, Edward, Philip Frederick, Henrietta Marie, Sophia of Hanover, and the last, Gustavus, was born on the 2nd of January 1632. Later that same month, Frederick said farewell to Elizabeth and set out on a journey to join the King of Sweden on the battlefield after declining conditions set out by King Gustavus Adolphus that would have seen the Swedish king assist in his restoration. The pair parted and Frederick headed back towards The Hague. However, he had been suffering from an infection since the beginning of October 1632, and he died on the morning of the 29th of November before reaching The Hague. When Elizabeth received the news of her husband's death, she became senseless with grief and for 3 days did not eat, drink, nor sleep. When Charles I heard of Elizabeth's state, he invited her to return to England. However, she refused her brother's help. The rights of her son and Frederick's heir, Charles Louis, remained to be fought for. Elizabeth then fought for her son's rights, but she remained in The Hague even after he reigned the Electorate of the Palatinate in 1648. Elizabeth filled her time with copious letter writing and making marriage matches for her children. Her life after the death of her husband, however, had its share of heartache. Between his death in 1632 and her own death 30 years later, she witnessed the death of 4 more of her 10 surviving children: Gustavus in 1641, Philip in 1650, Henrietta Marie in 1651, and Maurice in 1652. She suffered another blow with the execution of her brother Charles I, King of England, in 1649, and the removal into exile of the Stuart family during the years of the Commonwealth. The relationship with her remaining living children also became somewhat estranged. Although she did spend time with her growing number of grandchildren, she began to pay the price for having been a distant mother to most of her own children, and the idea of going to England was now upmost in her thoughts. Elizabeth, now determined to visit her native land, arrived in England on the 26th of May 1661. By July, she was no longer planning to return to The Hague and made plans for the remainder of her furniture, clothing and other property to be sent to her in England. She then proceeded to move to Drury House, where she established a small but impressive and welcoming household. On the 29th of January 1662, she made another move to Leicester House, but by this time she was quite ill. Elizabeth was suffering from pneumonia, and on the 10th of February 1662, she hemorrhaged from her lungs and died soon after midnight on the 13th of February 1662. On the evening of the 17th of February, when her coffin, where her remains had been placed the previous day, left Somerset House, Rupert was the only one of her sons to follow the funeral procession to Westminster Abbey. There in the chapel of Henry VII, a survivor of an earlier age, isolated and without a country she could really call her own, was laid to rest among her ancestors and close to her beloved elder brother, Henry, Prince of Wales. And this concludes the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe for future videos. Thank you.